Hello, before we get into this week's video, I wanted to talk about a very specific project that's quite close to my heart. It is originating in Brazil, and what it is the translation of my book, The Complete Guide to Epic Campaigns, into Portuguese. Now, long story short, a young group of role players headed up by Ettore got hold of me and said, we want to translate your book into Portuguese, and so they started doing so. Now, of course, this is a mammoth task, translating the craziness that is my written word into a different language. What they've done is that they've started a project on Catarse, which is the Brazilian equivalent of Kickstarter, in order to fund the complete conversion of this book. Now, you might not speak Portuguese, but if you do know of someone who does, or if you simply want to support role-playing in a different language to grow our hobby beyond the borders of just those of us that speak English, then have a look at this project. It really is awesome that these youngsters have reached out and are wanting to make a difference in their role-playing community.
Hello, all of you great game masters and great players as well. My name is Ettore. I'm standing for my group, Troubadours, Modernist RPG, which is a collection of players and game masters such as yourselves. First of all, we would like to thank Guy for the space he's granting us, for the support and the opportunity, and also the confidence in our work, for translating the complete guide to creating epic campaigns into Portuguese language. So we would appreciate if you could support, even if you're not a Portuguese language speaker, you can still send a contribution. It will be very inexpensive for all of you who pay in dollar or pound. That's very affordable if you just want to contribute. If you are a Portuguese language speaker, you can also get your own copy of PDF or even physical version depending on our stretch goals for complete guide in Portuguese language. All of your support would make us very glad, and if you could help us keep expanding RPG culture around our country and maybe bringing together closer this wonderfully diverse community of RPG in both national and international levels, we would be very glad. So I guess see you next time, and well, good games.
あなたは日本語がわかりますか？は？大丈夫。Well, of course, the language of shipping is one of an international language. Everyone can understand what we mean by ship. You see, ship? Yeah? Good, very good. Yeah, I'll be with you in a minute. I'm just struggling. These van braces are not, they're quite tricky to work on with one hand, and as a left-handed working, it's quite tricky. I've got to hold these straps here. Yeah, we're raiding today. Yeah, we're going to go and take some innocent village and find whatever it is that they've got and take it from them. I think that's a fair thing to do. They worked for it. Now we're going to go work for it. It's dangerous stuff. Very dangerous stuff. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Campaign Creator. Now, we are looking at accents and how to use accents in your game so that it's not insulting or derogatory. There's a lot of talk about whether we should use them, whether they're condescending, whether they're appropriate, and all those kinds of things. And let me start off by saying this video, as far as I'm concerned, there are ways in which you can use accents that are absolutely appropriate, and that accent use and the way that you use your voice will enhance your game tenfold. There's no doubt about it. I also believe that almost anyone can do accents. It's all about listening to how people sound and absorbing as much television as possible so that you can start to figure out how to do it, and then practice. But that's not the purview of today's video. video. If you want to look at how to do specific accents, head on over to an earlier video that I did called Accents. It was done many years ago, where I unpack how you use the different parts of your mouth to try and create different sounding accents. We're going to look at accents from terms of should we be using them in our games anyway, and if we do, how do we do so in a respectful manner? So what is the function of accents? Why do we use accents in the first place? Well, as you can see from the three characters that I presented at the beginning of this video, and they're going to pop in throughout the rest of the video just to help us understand and unpack a bit more, the idea of accents is differentiation. It really is going to make the characters in your world come alive if from different locations there are different sounds. Now, that doesn't mean that we're talking racially specific. We're talking location specific. So even myself as a South African, I can tell you that someone grew up in Cape Town, someone grew up in Durban, or someone grew up in Johannesburg, regardless of the color of their skin or their background or their education or anything along those lines, just by listening to their accent. What that means is when I'm then presented with a South African on movies or screens and things, I listen to the accent that they're doing, and generally speaking, most South Africans go, it's that voice actor. There's one particular voice actor in Hollywood who helps coach people on how to sound South African, and he does a very good job of it for that particular type of South African. So it's about differentiation. We all grew up in Durban, so there's always a slight Durban twang. It doesn't matter if you're speaking English or Zulu or Xhosa, or it doesn't really matter. If you grew up in that area, you have that slight accent. So differentiation allows you to differentiate your NPCs quite quickly. Do not fall into the trap that I frequently fall into, which is where you simply use accents as the only means of differentiation. So that's important. Now, it also contributes significantly to world building. So if you're creating a campaign and that you decide that all people from Antiva should have a slightly Antivan accent where there's a slight Spanish twist to the whole thing, absolutely fine. People who grew up in Antiva have that. It is about creating a living, viable world. Why do accents develop in the first place? Well, again, it's simply people in a particular area start to talk like one another. It's what we do as humans to make sure that we kind of work together as a team. We do the exact opposite sometimes when we're trying to lord over others, and we try and put on a slightly better accent. So we sound as if we're slightly better bred, which somehow translates into, you should treat me differently because I speak differently. All those kinds of tricks and things contribute to how and why accents develop. Of course, then, if English or whatever language you happen to be speaking in is not your first language is going to heavily impact how you then pronounce things in a second language. And having lived in Japan for a while, I can tell you that the Japanese accent that we've heard on television is not the actual accent that most Japanese speakers have when speaking English in Japan. Although what I do is definitely not Japanese, having lived here for several years now, I can tell you the Japanese accent is far greater than that of which we are exposed to in television. And even in television, the way that they pronounce or they have the Japanese accent is much, much different from how it's spoken here in actual Japan. However, bear this in mind when trying to do a Japanese accent. Of course, there's always that famous L and R confusion because that sound R doesn't exist in Japanese, so an L often gets put in there, which does lead to some very, I would say, unfortunate memes that have arisen over the past decade or so in terms of that. However, that's not what's important. Bearing in mind, Japanese often assumes that you understand the context of the language. So it removes things like you, me, those sort of things. So instead of saying, "Anata wa wakarimasu ka," which means, do you understand? Wakarimasu ka is just understand, question mark. So oftentimes there are things that are dropped. So when you want to sound Japanese, most important is to drop certain conjugation. Not important. You understand context, you understand, huh? Very important. Also, there is certain amount of control over mouth. I don't move tongue very much when speaking Japanese or Asiatic sound. This is not insult to people. This is way of making sound that is truly unique and original in terms of a characterization. Another thing to bear in mind is Japanese is quite punctuated in terms of my ear anyway. The sounds that they have, the 55 sounds that make up the language, are quite staccato in their delivery. As a result, when speaking English, I try to also make sure I'm very punctuate each and every syllable to make sure it sounds much more appropriate than actually it is. There is a saying amongst the Japanese that English sounds very lyrical because it seems to roll from one end to the next. And this is something that we should bring into it. So when doing accents, try and listen to the original language and see what happens, and then incorporate it into your own so that you create a very specific sound that is specific to the locality in which those characters might have been raised. So you might get people who are Japanese but who are born in America and don't have any kind of accent other than the American accent that they have. That's important to bear in mind as well. The intention of the language and of the accent is also critically important. Characterization versus degradation. At no point do you ever want to position a specific accent as being an indicator of inferiority. You can use diction to do that. If you want to indicate that this is an uneducated individual who really has no classical training and was never exposed to Shakespeare, that's word choice that you should be using, not accent. Accent is never an indicator of intelligence or of capacity. It's simply how our mouths work. So to generally say, okay, well, I'm going to say that all the Irish are stupid, and all that they like to do is eat potatoes and drink Guinness, and sit around doing absolutely nothing because they're a bunch of lazy bastards. I would never do that just to use the accent to say, hey, these are useless people. I might go, all right, well, this person, this NPC, this character is uneducated. And they just happen to be from this location where they happen to have this kind of accent. In which case, they might then say something like, I don't understand why we don't just drink seawater. That would solve the world's problems in terms of a water shortage, wouldn't it? And as far as I'm concerned, the iceberg's melting. Well, that's just adding ice to the drink, isn't it? We do that all the time, so it's nothing to worry about. I might do something like that, where the intention, where the indication of the thought processes tell us that this is an individual who's not particularly bright. On the other hand, if it is characterization, and the person only speaks out of one side of their mouth because that's just how they happen to speak, because they've got a scar or something, that is brilliant. That is going to get your players, it's going to get people who are in your game to go, that's so-and-so, that is so-and-so. Remember, so-and-so always speaks out of the side of the mouth? That's the bad guy, that's the good guy, that's the hero, that's the queen, that's the... Again, characterization really allows you to make the best of accents, as far as I'm concerned. Accents don't just necessarily need to be of a specific grouping of ethnicities. It could also be just of a different style in which you control your voice. For example, the character of Jonathan Swift that's appeared on this channel a couple of times, well, he has a slightly deeper voice because instead of using the higher register, I push the voice down lower into my throat. Then, of course, I add on one of the accents that I think has been ripped off the most, which is that sort of Eton-raised Queen's English, if you so like. So you get this remarkable combination where you have a deep voice, but at the same time, putting an accent on top of that changes it from your normal voice. Now, again, as with all accents, the important thing is not to strain your voice whilst doing these things. I said it before in the last video and I'm saying it again. You should only do accents or voice manipulation for what works for you. And the more you get used to it, the more you practice it, the better you will get. But throwing the register around in the different parts of your throat, so if you speak higher up, you kind of get a slightly younger voice, whereas if you speak lower down, you get a slightly deeper voice. It's all about playing where you kind of force the air through your throat, to describe it for lack of a better word. So accents don't just have to be about putting on a funny sounding voice. It can be about where you put it down in your throat, very low down or very high up. It depends on to change things accordingly. Now, importantly, And I think this is the big one, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of whether accents are cultural appropriation and all that kind of stuff, which we do have to guard against. We do have to make sure that we're not mocking, we're not degrading, we're not saying, look, this accent equates into evil or good or neutral. We associate this with that. We do, to a large degree, have some of those things ingrained into us because for the last 400 or 500 years, we've been taught certain accents are better than others. Again, in your world, though, you don't have to do that. Importantly, is once you've established that perhaps the villain speaks with a very heavy German kind of accent and there is this malice and evil behind it, that they also have other individuals who are from the same area who are not evil, who are not malicious, who are not there to make sure that the world comes to an end, but who are there simply because they are living and they want everyone to be happy and safe. So the important thing is that your villain might have an accent, but make sure that other characters from the same location, the same region, are good or neutral or evil. You should be doing this anyway. Whether you have an evil dwarf, the next dwarf the party encounters should be neutral or should be good, to show that the world isn't just one-dimensional and that all dwarves are evil or all dwarves are good. It's about making sure you do the same thing with accents. Everybody who has this type of accent is not evil. It's just that they grew up in the same region. This one is evil because they are doing evil acts. This one is good because they do good acts. Rather let that determine the character's nature than the accents. So this is a language, this sort of Scandinavian pronunciation that I picked up only this year, as a matter of fact. It was quite exciting for me. There was a new TV series called Norsemen. Norsemen came out on Netflix and I watched it. I love it, absolutely love it. It presents the Vikings as something not just as crazy, but as people and with very modern sensibilities, very funny. The idea of doing Norwegian, Scandinavian, Swedish kind of sound, I'm probably being banned from Scandinavia as this video plays out, but the idea of going into that territory with this very, I don't want to say complicated voice, but the general cadence of Swedish is the emphasis is on the second letter or on the first vowel in the word. So when, for example, you want to say, I'm going to the boat, the emphasis is not on the first letter, the B, but it's on the oat. So I'm going to the boat. That is how they do it. And then there's this funny kind of up and down cadence where, again, it's not the same as English, and I think that is the important thing, is the emphasis is on different places in the sentence. So what that does is it makes it sound very different to what we are used to hearing. And that ultimately is the point. If we can make the sounds, the accent, the whatever it is that we're going for, if we can make that fit the culture, fit the area that we're talking about, but has a different sound. So it comes out in a different kind of way. There is emphasis on different parts of the word. There's a different way in which we speak. There's a strengthening or an elongation of certain sounds. Whenever we play with that kind of thing, we're creating unique sounding individuals. The important thing is to make sure that you are consistent throughout the entire thing. Make sure that what you are saying, the way you're saying it, is applied to anyone from that region. Not racially necessarily. Elves, dwarves, humans, Vulcans, Klingons, if they grow up on the same locality where that accent exists, they will have the same accent. That's just how it kind of works. We pick it up. We learn from each other how to speak. And so that is generally how it goes. So that is, for me, an important component. Consistency of location, dialects, and accents. I believe if we follow these three things, if we make sure that the function, the location tells us the accent, the intention of that is to create an existing world, one that feels real because there are these different, unique ways in which people within your space talk, and that the individuals within that space are not defined by their accent but by their actions. I think that is the best way to utilize accents in your game. Let me know what you do. How do you work around with accents? Do you avoid them completely? Do you decide that y'all need to figure out a better way of identifying those that are evil based on previous historical actions? All those kinds of things. How do you do it? What do you do? Put your comments down below. Let's read, let's share, let's engage. And of course, as always, until next time, I wish you the very happiest of gaming. You must like, subscribe, and no, that's all you must do. Just do that. Do that and I am happy. Right, so on here, you will see there's a like and a subscribe button. Now, those are very important things, apparently. I can't find them myself, but they are there. Probably. Okay, so that's the end of the video. You will now see, if you please, there's that like button and the subscribe button and that little bell. You can click on that bell and it will tinkle whenever there's a new video coming out, which is good. And that would be nice. And I am so very happy that you have watched all the way to the end. Yeah, it's good. Very good. Well done. Good. It's good for you. You can sleep well tonight. So I've got to go, you know, fight. Do the thing, but good for you. I like it. Good. You should be proud. Your mother will be proud. By the way, she will be very proud. Yes.